Little girl says, "I know you, your photo is in Dad's wallet," to Millionaire, leaving him in shock. The attic air was thick with dust and secrets. 17-year-old Lily Marshall's hands trembled as she held the faded blue envelope, its seal broken but its contents preserved by time. She had come up here looking for old photos for her school project, but what she found would shatter her world forever. "My dearest Lily," the letter began in her mother's elegant handwriting. "By the time you read this, if you ever do, I hope you're old enough to understand. The weight of lies and injustice has become too heavy to bear." The words blurred as tears filled Lily's eyes. 10 years of believing her mother died in a car accident, all a carefully constructed lie. The truth was far more devastating. Below, in the modest living room of their small house, Andrew Marshall heard his daughter's muffled sob. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with a fear he hadn't felt since that terrible night a decade ago. Lily. He found her crumpled on the attic floor, the letter clutched to her chest. One look at the familiar blue envelope, and Andrew's world stopped spinning. "Oh God, no." "She killed herself," Dad Lily's voice cracked. "Because of what they did to you. Because no one believed you." Outside, Stephen Marshall stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold through the window. He had come to make amends, carrying the evidence that would finally clear his brother's name. But he was too late again. Through the glass, he saw his brother collapse beside his niece, both of them shaking with sobs. The truth he had discovered about the corporate conspiracy, about how Andrew had been framed, about Margaret's desperate final days, all of it meant nothing in the face of this raw pain. His emergency board meeting could wait. The press conference announcing Andrew's innocence could wait. Right now, his family was breaking apart all over again, and this time he had to find the courage to walk through that door. As Stephen took his first step toward the porch, he heard Lily's anguished cry, "Uncle Stephen was wrong about you. Everyone was wrong about you. Why didn't you tell me?" The weight of a decade's worth of guilt pressed down on Stephen's shoulders as he reached for the doorbell. Some truths come too late, but perhaps it wasn't too late for healing to begin. If this heart-wrenching opening has touched your soul, join our storytelling journey by subscribing. Together, we'll uncover more powerful tales of redemption, family bonds, and healing that will move your heart and transform your perspective on love and forgiveness. Stephen Marshall's morning ritual had become as cold and predictable as the marble floors of his 20-room mansion. At 45, he had achieved everything society deemed valuable: CEO of the country's leading tech company, a net worth in billions, and a name that commanded respect in every boardroom across America. Yet each morning, as he stared at his reflection in the imported Italian mirror, he saw only a man who had lost his way. His perfectly tailored suits couldn't hide the emptiness in his eyes. The Wall Street Journal might celebrate his latest acquisition, but no one was there to celebrate his birthday last month. His house, a masterpiece of modern architecture overlooking the city's most exclusive neighborhood, echoed with a silence that no amount of money could fill. His personal assistant had scheduled his life down to the minute. Meetings, conferences, charity galas, all carefully arranged to maintain the image of success. But between those appointments, in the quiet moments when his phone stopped ringing, Stephen found himself haunted by memories of a different life. A life where laughter filled the halls of a much smaller house, where Sunday dinners meant something more than another networking opportunity. The east wing of his mansion housed a state-of-the-art home theater that had never seen a family movie night. The professional kitchen, with its gleaming copper pots and triple ovens, had never produced a holiday meal. The Olympic-sized pool, heated year-round, had never heard the splash of children playing or the casual conversations of family gatherings. Each night, Stephen returned to an empty house that felt more like a museum than a home. His footsteps echoed through marble hallways lined with expensive art pieces that no one else would ever appreciate. The cleaning staff came and went like ghosts. maintaining the perfection of a life that looked flawless from the outside but felt hollow within. His success had come at a price he hadn't fully understood until it was too late. The corporate ladder he had climbed so ruthlessly had become a wall between him and everything that once mattered. The brother he had wrongly accused, the sister-in-law he had never truly known, the niece he had never met, all sacrificed on the altar of ambition and misplaced pride. The irony wasn't lost on him that his company specialized in communication technology, yet he couldn't bridge the gap between himself and his own family. His innovations had connected millions of people worldwide, but he couldn't connect with the ones who should have mattered most. Sometimes in the dead of night, when sleep eluded him, Stephen would find himself in his home office, staring at an old family photo hidden in his desk drawer. It was taken at his parents' 30th anniversary celebration, before the accusations, before the fall. Andrew stood beside him, both of them smiling, their arms around each other's shoulders. They looked like brothers then, not the strangers they had become. His wealth manager had recently reported another record-breaking quarter. The board had approved his vision for global expansion. His face had graced the cover of Fortune magazine 3 times this year alone. Yet here he was, eating another solitary dinner in a dining room designed for 20, the only sound the gentle hum of the climate control system maintaining the perfect temperature for his perfect, empty life. The young executives at his company envied his lifestyle, dreaming of achieving what he had. If only they could see beyond the facade, beyond the carefully curated public image, to the man who had everything and nothing at the same time. They might learn that success without connection was merely survival with better furniture. Each morning, as he prepared for another day of meetings and decisions that would affect thousands of lives, Stephen Marshall, the titan of industry, the visionary leader, the billionaire philanthropist, fought the growing realization that he had built an empire of glass, impressive, valuable, but ultimately fragile and transparent, revealing the emptiness within. The Marshall name hadn't always been synonymous with technological innovation and corporate success. 3 generations ago, the family built its foundation in traditional manufacturing, starting with a small tool factory that grew into Marshall Manufacturing Corporation. George Marshall, Stephen and Andrew's grandfather, had built the company with calloused hands and unwavering determination, teaching his children that integrity was worth more than profit. Under the leadership of their father, Robert Marshall, the company flourished throughout the 1980s and 1990s. The factory floors buzzed with activity, providing jobs for hundreds of local families. The Marshall family became pillars of the community, known not just for their business success, but for their genuine care for their employees. Christmas parties at the Marshall house were legendary, with Robert insisting that every worker's child receive a personalized gift. Stephen and Andrew grew up watching their father balance business acumen with human compassion. Robert would often say a company is only as strong as its weakest workers. Trust the brothers spent their summers working various jobs on the factory floor, learning the business from the ground up. Stephen showed an early aptitude for numbers and strategy, while Andrew had a natural way with people, remembering every employee's name and story. Their mother, Elizabeth, was the family's moral compass. A former schoolteacher, she ensured that both boys understood the responsibility that came with privilege. Sunday dinners were sacred in the Marshall household, where conversations ranged from business ethics to community needs. But Elizabeth's garden parties brought together people from all walks of life, breaking down the social barriers that often separated business owners from their employees. The first cracks in the Marshall empire appeared during the economic downturn of the early 2000s. Robert's commitment to keeping jobs American-based, despite mounting pressure to outsource, strained the company's finances. Competitors with cheaper foreign labor began undercutting their prices. The board, including several longtime family friends, pushed for modernization and cost-cutting measures. It was during this turbulent time that Stephen, fresh from his MBA and burning with ambition, proposed a radical restructuring of the company. His plan involved selling off the manufacturing division and pivoting to technology. Andrew, who had just completed his business degree, advocated for maintaining the traditional business while gradually modernizing. The brothers' differing visions created the first serious rift in their relationship. Robert, torn between his sons' competing strategies, made a fateful decision. He appointed Stephen as CEO, believing his older son's innovative approach would secure the company's future. Andrew was given control of the manufacturing division, with the understanding that he would oversee its gradual transition. The decision shook the family's dynamics, though Elizabeth worked tirelessly to maintain peace between her sons. The transformation might have succeeded if not for the devastating events of 2008. In the midst of the global financial crisis, large discrepancies were discovered in the manufacturing division's books. Millions had vanished, and all evidence pointed to Andrew. Stephen, already frustrated by his brother's resistance to change, led the internal investigation himself. The board, now dominated by Stephen's allies, demanded immediate action. What followed was the darkest chapter in the Marshall family history. Andrew maintained his innocence, but Stephen, blinded by ambition and convinced of his brother's guilt, pushed for criminal charges. Elizabeth begged her sons to work together to find the truth, but the trust between them had shattered. Robert, his health failing under the stress, suffered a stroke that left him unable to intervene. The local press, which had once celebrated the Marshall family's success, now feasted on their downfall. Andrew faced public humiliation as he was escorted from the family company. Long-time family friends chose sides, and the tight-knit community that the Marshalls had nurtured for generations began to unravel. Elizabeth watched helplessly as her family tore itself apart. In the aftermath, Stephen transformed Marshall Manufacturing into Marshall Tech, riding the wave of digital innovation to unprecedented success. The old factory buildings were sold off, and with them went the last physical reminders of the family's manufacturing legacy. Robert partially recovered but forever changed by the stroke, retreated from public life with Elizabeth to their summer home in Maine, unable to bear witnessing the final dismantling of his life's work. The story of the Marshall family's rise and fall became a cautionary tale in business schools, though few knew the full truth of what had transpired. The glossy corporate history on Marshall Tech's website made no mention of Andrew or the manufacturing days. It was as if the family's past had been erased, rewritten to begin with Stephen's technological vision. While Stephen Marshall ascended to the pinnacle of corporate success, his younger brother Andrew's life spiraled into a nightmare of false accusations and personal demons. The day he was escorted from Marshall Manufacturing, photographers captured his shame for the evening news. His wife Margaret, 6 months pregnant with Lily, watched in horror as their world crumbled. The criminal investigation dragged on for months, draining their savings and destroying Andrew's reputation. Every job application was met with polite rejection. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. The comfortable, upper-middle-class life they had known evaporated, forcing them to sell their home and move to a modest apartment on the other side of town. Margaret took a job as a receptionist, working until the day before Lily's birth, while Andrew fought to clear his name. The charges were eventually dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the damage was done. No formal apology was issued. No job offers materialized. The whispers and sideways glances followed Andrew everywhere. The stress took its toll on Margaret, who developed severe postpartum depression after Lily's birth. She watched her husband sink deeper into despair, powerless to help. Andrew found temporary solace in gambling. What started as small bets to chase the thrill of his former success quickly evolved into a full-blown addiction. He convinced himself that one big win could restore their life, give Lily the future she deserved. Instead, he lost their last savings, then borrowed from loan sharks, spiraling deeper into debt and desperation. Margaret's suicide note, found years later, revealed the depth of their shared pain. She had discovered evidence that could have cleared Andrew's name, but fear of Stephen's corporate power and influence paralyzed her. Unable to bear the weight of this knowledge, seeing no way out, she chose a permanent escape. The official story, a car accident, was crafted to protect Lily and preserve what remained of the family's dignity. Left alone with a 3-year-old daughter and crushing guilt, Andrew hit rock bottom. One night, after losing borrowed money at an underground casino, he stood on the bridge overlooking the city's river. The same water that had once powered his grandfather's first factory now beckoned with dark promises of peace. Only the thought of Lily, waiting at home with a neighbor, pulled him back from the edge. That night became his turning point. Andrew found a Gamblers Anonymous meeting and never looked back. He took any job he could find: janitor, night watchman, warehouse worker. He moved into a tiny house in a working-class neighborhood, determined to give Lily stability. Every spare dollar went to repaying debts and building a small savings account for his daughter's education. The years of manual labor aged him prematurely, but they also taught him humility and resilience. He discovered a strength he never knew he possessed. The factory workers he had once managed became his colleagues and friends, accepting him without judgment. Their simple acts of kindness, a shared lunch, a ride to work, watching Lily when he worked late, restored his faith in humanity. Lily became his reason for living, his miracle in the darkness. He shielded her from the worst of their circumstances, creating a childhood filled with love, if not luxury. They played soccer in the park, made up stories on rainy days, and celebrated small victories together. When she asked about her mother, he shared only the happy memories, carrying alone the burden of the truth. Through it all, Andrew kept a single photo in his wallet, not of his successful brother, but of their father cutting the ribbon at the factory's 50th anniversary celebration. It reminded him of the values that had built the Marshall name: honesty, hard work, and caring for others. Though he had lost his inheritance, he was determined to pass these principles on to Lily. And the community center became his sanctuary. Initially volunteering to fulfill court-mandated community service from his gambling charges, Andrew found purpose in helping others who had hit bottom. He led support groups, mentored troubled youth, and slowly rebuilt his sense of worth. The center's director, Sarah Thompson, saw past his history to recognize his natural gift for counseling and eventually offered him a paid position. Years of therapy helped Andrew understand that his gambling addiction had been an attempt to regain control, to prove his worth in a world that had branded him a failure. Accepting his powerlessness over the past freed him to focus on the present. He learned to find joy in simple things: Lily's school achievements, quiet evenings reading together, the satisfaction of honest work. When rumors of his brother's tech empire reached him, Andrew felt no envy, only sadness for what their family had lost. He kept track of Stephen's success through newspaper headlines, praying that his brother had found peace in his achievements. The truth about the corporate conspiracy remained buried in Margaret's grave, a secret Andrew carried to protect his daughter from the bitterness that had destroyed her mother. Early Sunday mornings in Greenwood Heights belonged to the joggers, those privileged few who could afford to live where the air was cleaner and the streets were lined with century-old oak trees. Stephen Marshall maintained his weekly ritual with the precision that had built his empire. 5:30 a.m., Italian running shoes, carefully plotted 7-mile route. The sound of his footsteps on the immaculate sidewalk matched the rhythm of his solitary life. That particular morning, something pulled him off his usual path. Perhaps it was fatigue from yesterday's board meeting, or maybe the weight of another sleepless night, but he found himself running through unfamiliar streets. The mansions gave way to modest homes, then to apartment buildings showing signs of wear. The air carried the scent of fresh bread from a corner bakery, mixed with the earthier aromas of real life being lived. A child's voice pierced his thoughts. "I know you. Your picture is in my daddy's wallet." Stephen stopped abruptly, his heart pounding from more than exertion. Through the morning mist, he saw a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, sitting on the steps of a small community center. She wore a faded blue dress and scuffed sneakers, her brown hair tied in 2 uneven braids. Something about her eyes, their shape, their intensity, struck him with an unsettling familiarity. "Excuse me," he managed, his usual corporate confidence wavering. The girl stood up, clutching a worn soccer ball. "You're the man from Daddy's picture. The one he looks at when he thinks I'm sleeping." She took a step closer, studying his face with disarming directness. He gets sad when he looks at it. Sometimes he cries. Stephen felt the ground shift beneath his feet. How many men in this neighborhood would carry his picture? Only one. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lily Marshall. My dad's name is Andrew. He's inside, setting up for the morning support group." She pointed to the community center's doors. "Want to meet him? He'll be surprised. He thinks you don't know where we live." The name hit him like a physical blow. Lily Marshall, his niece, the baby born just before everything fell apart. The child who should have grown up in privilege but instead stood before him in hand-me-downs, somehow still radiating a joy his own wealth couldn't buy. "Does your father," Stephen swallowed hard, "does he talk about me?" Lily tilted her head, considering. "Not really. But sometimes when he reads the business news, he says that's my brother really quietly. And he kept the old sign from Grandpa's factory in our living room, even though we don't have much space." Each word was a revelation, a glimpse into the life his brother had built from the ashes of their family's destruction. Stephen had imagined Andrew bitter, broken, consumed by the same anger that had driven them apart. Instead, his daughter spoke of a man who had preserved their connection, however fragile. The sign, Stephen said, his throat tight. "Does it say Marshall Manufacturing, where quality is family?" Lily's face lit up. "Yes." "Did you make it?" "Daddy says his grandfather wrote those words when it was just one little building." "Our grandfather," Stephen corrected gently. "Your great-grandfather. He had it hand-painted the day the factory opened. Your father. He kept it all these years." "It's the prettiest thing in our house," Lily said proudly. "Daddy polishes it every Sunday before his meeting. He says it reminds him of what's important." She studied Stephen's face again. "You look different than in the picture. Sadder, maybe, but your eyes are the same." Stephen felt tears threatening something that hadn't happened since the day he'd watched Andrew being escorted from the factory. This child, this innocent bridge between past and present, saw him with a clarity that stripped away all his corporate armor. "The meetings are almost done," Lily continued, unaware of the emotional storm she'd unleashed. "Daddy always buys me a hot chocolate after. You could join us." She held out her small hand, offering more than just guidance to the community center's doors. At that moment, Stephen Marshall, CEO of a global tech empire, found himself facing the most important decision of his life. His morning schedule included a video call with Tokyo, a strategy session for the upcoming merger, and a lunch meeting with potential investors. His assistant would be frantic. His board members would be waiting. Lily's hand remained extended, her eyes Andrew's eyes, watching him with an hope that cut through decades of practiced detachment. In them, he saw a chance at redemption, a bridge across the chasm he'd created. "Your dad might not want to see me," he said softly. "He wants to," Lily replied with a child's certainty. "He kept your picture, didn't he? Even when we had to sell our car and move to the small house, he kept your picture. That means something. Daddy says keeping things that hurt means you're not ready to let them go." Out of the mouths of babes, Stephen thought. A lifetime of corporate negotiations hadn't prepared him for the simple wisdom of a child who had inherited the best of the Marshall spirit, the ability to see past surfaces to what truly mattered. The community center's meeting room smelled of coffee and second chances. Andrew Marshall stood at the front, gathering papers from another successful Gamblers Anonymous session, when his daughter's voice cut through the quiet morning air. "Daddy, look who I found." The papers scattered across the floor as Andrew turned. Time seemed to freeze as the Marshall brothers faced each other for the first time in a decade. Stephen, still in his running gear, looked absurdly out of place among the folding chairs and motivational posters. Andrew's hands gripped the podium, his knuckles white with tension. "Hello, Andrew," Stephen managed, his practiced corporate voice failing him. Up close, he could see what the years had done to his younger brother. Andrew's hair had grayed at the temples. Deep lines etched around his eyes told stories of struggles Stephen could only imagine. Yet there was a dignity in his bearing that no hardship had erased. Stephen Andrews' voice was carefully neutral, betraying neither anger nor welcome. His eyes darted to Lily, who stood between them, beaming with the pride of a successful matchmaker. "Sweetheart, why don't you go ask MS. Sarah for that hot chocolate?" "But Dad." "Please." Lily, the gentle firmness in Andrew's voice, brooked no argument. Lily looked between her father and uncle, then reluctantly headed toward the office, throwing concerned glances over her shoulder. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence. Decades of unspoken words, accusations, and regrets filled the space between them. Through the windows, early morning sunlight cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. "She has Mother's smile," Stephen said finally, desperate to break the tension. And Margaret's spirit. Andrew's reply carried a warning some topics were still too raw to touch. He bent to gather the scattered papers, more to have something to do with his hands than from any real need for order. Stephen moved to help, but Andrew's slight head shake stopped him. The corporate titan stood awkwardly, watching his younger brother perform this simple task, aware that he had lost the right to offer assistance long ago. "Why are you here?" Stephen Andrews straightened, papers clutched to his chest like a shield. "Surely your morning run doesn't usually bring you to this neighborhood." "I don't know," Stephen admitted, the truth surprising them both. "I just started running and ended up here. Then Lily recognized you from the photo." Andrew finished. "I should have known she'd find a way to meet you eventually. She's too curious for her own good sometimes." "The factory sign," Stephen said softly. "She told me you kept it." A flicker of emotion crossed Andrew's face. "Some things are worth preserving, even when everything else is lost." He paused, studying his brother. "Though I suppose that sounds foolishly sentimental to a man who turned our family's legacy into a tech empire." The bitterness in those words was subtle but unmistakable. Stephen flinched, remembering the day he'd ordered the old factory demolished. He hadn't known Andrew had salvaged the sign. "We should talk, Andrew. There are things you need to know." "No." Andrew's response was quick, firm. "Whatever you came to say, whatever corporate reconciliation you're planning, I'm not interested. My life is here now. Simple, honest work helping people who've lost their way. I won't risk that peace, not even for." The office door opened, and Lily bounded back in, clutching 2 paper cups. "I got hot chocolate for both of you. MS Sarah said it's on the house today because it's a special occasion." The brothers looked at their niece, then at each other. Andrew's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, sweetheart, but Uncle Stephen probably has important meetings to get to." "Actually," Stephen said, accepting the cup from Lily's hopeful hands, "I have time." He pulled out his phone, sent a quick text to his assistant cancelling his morning appointments, then turned the device off completely, something he hadn't done in years. Andrew watched this gesture with guarded surprise. The Stephen he remembered would never have disrupted his schedule so casually. "Lily, why don't you show your uncle the mural you helped paint in the children's room?" Lily's face lit up. "You'll love it, Uncle Stephen. We used all the colors in the rainbow, and I painted a big tree that looks just like the one in Grandpa's garden." As she led Stephen down the hall, chattering about her artistic choices, Andrew followed at a distance, watching his daughter work her innocent magic on the brother he'd once idolized. The morning sun streaming through the windows caught the silver in Stephen's hair, reminding Andrew that time had marked them both. In the children's room, surrounded by bright paintings and tiny furniture, the absurdity of their situation struck home. Here was Stephen Marshall, whose net worth could probably buy the entire block, admiring a child's mural in a community center that survived on donations and hope. "You've done well with her," Stephen said quietly, as Lily explained the story behind each painted cloud and flower. "She's extraordinary." "She saved my life," Andrew replied, equally soft. "More than once." Their eyes met in shared understanding, the first honest moment between them in years. But before either could speak further, a commotion in the hallway broke the spell. The morning programs were starting, parents and children filling the center with life and noise. "But we should go," Andrew said. "The room will be needed for the children's group." Stephen nodded, feeling the moment slip away. "Of course. Thank you for the hot chocolate and the tour." "Come back tomorrow," Lily insisted. "I'll show you my soccer tricks. I'm getting really good." The brothers' eyes met again over her head. This time, Andrew's nod was almost imperceptible, but it was there. "I'd like that," Stephen said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "If it's all right with your father." As he walked back into the morning sunshine, Stephen realized his designer running shoes were scuffed from the center's floor, and his tech fabric shirt smelled of institutional coffee. Somehow these imperfections felt more valuable than all the polished perfection of his usual life. That evening, both Marshall brothers found themselves haunted by memories they'd long tried to suppress. In his mansion, Stephen sat in his study, an untouched glass of scotch on his desk, staring at old newspaper clippings he'd kept hidden in a locked drawer. The headlines screamed accusations: Marshall manufacturing scandal rocks family empire, younger Marshall brother accused of embezzlement, tech division saves company as manufacturing collapses. But across town, Andrew sat on his worn couch beneath the old factory sign, its brass letters gleaming in the dim light. Lily was asleep, but he could hear her occasional murmurs through the thin walls of their small house. He held the photograph from his wallet, not the one Lily had mentioned, but another, taken the day he and Stephen had graduated from business school. They stood arm in arm, both wearing matching grins, their futures bright with promise. The memories came flooding back for both brothers, though they sat miles apart. The board meeting where everything had fallen apart played like a movie in their minds. Stephen standing at the head of the table, presenting evidence of financial discrepancies. Andrew, stunned into silence by the accusations, their father, Robert, clutching his chest as the stress triggered his first minor stroke. "I trusted you," Stephen whispered to the empty study, remembering his own words from that day. "The company trusted you. How could you betray us like this?" In his modest living room, Andrew's hands trembled as he recalled his response. "I'm innocent, Stephen. Someone's framing me. Your own brother. How can you not even consider that possibility?" The investigation had been swift and merciless. Stephen, convinced of his brother's guilt, had pushed for criminal charges. The evidence seemed overwhelming: doctored books, mysterious transfers, offshore accounts in Andrew's name. What Stephen hadn't known, what he couldn't have known, was that every piece of evidence had been meticulously fabricated by someone they had both trusted. Margaret had tried to intervene, scheduling meetings with Stephen that he'd cancelled, sending letters he'd returned unopened. She'd even camped outside his office building one day, 8 months pregnant with Lily, hoping to make him listen. Security had escorted her out. "Your uncle wasn't always like this," Andrew whispered to Lily's school photo on the mantel. "He used to be the person I admired most in the world. Brilliant, driven, but also kind. Something changed him, or maybe I just never really knew him at all." In his study, Stephen picked up another clipping, this one announcing Marshall Tech's first billion-dollar valuation. The success had tasted like ashes the day it was announced. Their mother had called, her voice heavy with disappointment at what cost. "Stephen, was it worth destroying your brother's life?" The memories shifted to the courthouse steps, where reporters had swarmed Andrew after the charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. Stephen had watched from his car as his brother faced the cameras, Margaret supporting him, her face drawn with stress that would ultimately contribute to her death. "I could have investigated further," Stephen admitted to the silent room. "I could have looked deeper, questioned the sources." But I was so afraid of what else I might find, so convinced that protecting the company meant sacrificing everything else. In the small house, Andrew touched the factory sign's lettering, where quality is family, their grandfather's words seemed to mock him now. I should have seen it coming, he murmured. The way Thompson was always pushing for access to the manufacturing accounts, how he kept suggesting we move money between divisions for tax purposes. I trusted him because Stephen trusted him. The truth about James Thompson, their father's longtime friend and the company's CFO, hadn't emerged until years later, long after he'd disappeared with millions in embezzled funds. By then, the damage to the Marshall family was irreparable. Margaret was gone, Andrew's reputation was destroyed, and Stephen had built walls too high to scale. In both houses, the brothers found themselves drawn to family photos. Stephen stared at a picture of young Andrew teaching him to throw a baseball, while Andrew smiled sadly at an image of Stephen giving his valedictorian speech at their high school graduation. Each remembered the proud bond they'd once shared, the absolute faith that nothing could come between them. I saw what I expected to see. Stephen realized, the untouched scotch reflecting amber light across his desk. I was so focused on proving myself worthy of running the company, so determined to be the decisive leader, that I forgot to be a brother first. Andrew, running his fingers over the photo's worn edges, had his own epiphany. I was so hurt by his lack of trust, so angry at the betrayal, that I never considered he might have been as much a victim of Thompson's manipulation as I was. The night deepened around both men, each lost in thought about the morning's unexpected reunion. Stephen's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages he continued to ignore. Andrew's neighbor's televisions provided a muffled soundtrack to his contemplation. But perhaps Stephen thought, watching the city lights below his window, it's not too late to uncover the whole truth. Maybe Andrew considered, listening to Lily's peaceful breathing from the next room, it's time to let go of old wounds for her sake. Neither brother slept much that night, their minds too full of what had been lost and what might be salvaged. The dawn would bring new challenges, new opportunities for both healing and hurt. But for the first time in a decade, both felt the faintest stirring of hope that their broken family might somehow be mended. The breakthrough came on a rain-soaked Tuesday, 3 weeks after Stephen's first visit to the community center. He'd been spending his mornings there, ostensibly helping with the center's outdated computer systems, but really trying to rebuild a connection with his niece and, cautiously, with Andrew. That afternoon, while reviewing old company servers for a tech heritage project, a junior analyst made an unusual discovery. Mr. Marshall, the young woman said, standing nervously in his office doorway, I found something strange in the archived files from Marshall Manufacturing. There's an encrypted folder that doesn't match the company's standard protocols from that era. Stephen almost dismissed it as irrelevant ancient history better left buried, but something in her expression made him pause. Show me. The files were buried deep in the system, hidden behind layers of obsolete security. As they worked to decrypt them, Stephen's hands began to shake. The timestamps matched the exact period when the financial discrepancies had first appeared. But these weren't accounting files, they were emails, hundreds of them, between James Thompson and several offshore accounts. Can you trace these accounts? Stephen asked, his throat dry. The analyst nodded, fingers flying across her keyboard. They're sophisticated for their time, but with current technology. Yes, they all lead back to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The owner is... She stopped, face paling. Who? James Thompson, sir. And there's more. These emails, they discuss something called Operation Marshall Split. There are detailed plans for framing someone, creating false evidence. Stephen felt the room spin. He gripped the edge of his desk, memories flooding back. Thompson's insistence on handling the investigation personally, his convenient discovery of the damning evidence against Andrew, the way he'd pushed for immediate action, warning that any delay could damage the company irreparably. Download everything he ordered, every file, every email. Then send a security team to the storage facility on Palmer Street. There should be physical records from that period. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of revelations. Each new piece of evidence confirmed what Stephen had refused to consider a decade ago: his brother's innocence. Thompson had orchestrated everything, using his intimate knowledge of the company's systems to create a perfect scapegoat while he siphoned millions into his offshore accounts. But the most devastating discovery came near midnight, in a dusty box from the storage facility. A letter, sealed but never delivered, in Margaret's handwriting. The date stamp showed it had arrived at his office the day before her death. With trembling fingers, Stephen opened it. Dear Stephen, by the time you read this, I pray it won't be too late. I found proof of what really happened, documents showing how Thompson manipulated the accounts, created false evidence against Andrew. I've included copies with this letter. Your brother is innocent, Stephen. The man you trusted destroyed him while you looked the other way. I've tried to tell you, but your walls are too high. Now I'm scared. Thompson knows I've discovered the truth. Strange men have been watching our house. Last night, someone broke in but took nothing. I don't know who to trust anymore. The police won't help. Thompson's influence runs too deep. Andrew doesn't know about this letter. I want to protect him, protect our baby Lily, but I feel trapped. The weight of this truth is crushing me. If anything happens to me, promise you'll make this right. Promise you'll protect them. They're your family, Stephen. Some things matter more than money or pride. Your sister-in-law, Margaret. The papers that should have been attached were missing. Stephen sat in his dark office, the letter burning in his hands like a judgment. Margaret had tried to tell him. She'd had proof, had tried to save her family, and he'd been too blind, too proud to listen. Days later, they found Thompson's body in a hotel room in Bangkok. Apparent heart attack, the local authorities said. But in his hotel safe, they discovered a USB drive containing one final confession, triggered to be sent to multiple news outlets upon his death. Thompson, dying of pancreatic cancer, had chosen to clear his conscience. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Every detail of the scheme laid bare the careful manipulation of records, the gradual theft of millions, the calculated destruction of Andrew's reputation. Thompson had known the brothers' weaknesses, Stephen's pride and Andrew's trust, and exploited them perfectly. But the final revelation, hidden in Thompson's personal notes, was the most chilling. Margaret's death had not been the accident everyone believed. Fearing she would expose him, Thompson had arranged for her brakes to fail on that rainy night. Her death had been yet another casualty of his greed. Standing at his office window, watching dawn break over the city, Stephen felt the full weight of his failure. He'd been more than just wrong, he'd been a willing participant in the destruction of his own family. His blind faith in Thompson, his refusal to consider alternatives, his prideful certainty had cost his brother everything, had cost Margaret her life. The media was already buzzing with the story. Headlines screamed about corporate conspiracy and wrongful accusation. Marshall Tech's stock price would take a hit, but Stephen couldn't bring himself to care. All he could think about was his brother still running his morning support group at the community center, unaware that his decade-long nightmare was about to end. But would vindication be enough? Could any revelation, any apology repair what had been broken? Margaret was still dead. Lily had grown up without a mother. Andrew had lost years of his life to false accusations and poverty. His phone buzzed the crisis management team, no doubt, eager to control the narrative. Stephen let it ring. Instead, he picked up Margaret's letter again, reading her final plea: some things matter more than money or pride. I'm sorry, he whispered to her memory. I'm so sorry, but I'll make it right. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll make it right. Dawn had broken fully now, painting the sky in shades of promise and warning. In a few hours, Andrew would arrive at the community center, ready to help others fight their demons, unaware that his own personal demon had finally been exorcised. Stephen grabbed his coat. Some news couldn't wait for business hours. Some truths had waited far too long already. Andrew's hands shook as he read Thompson's confession for the third time. He sat in Stephen's office, surrounded by the evidence of his decade-long nightmare, while outside the city buzzed with the breaking scandal. The morning paper lay on the desk between them, its headline stark and unforgiving Marshall manufacturing scandal, the truth finally revealed. Margaret knew, Andrew said finally, his voice hollow. All this time, I thought the accident was my fault, that the stress of our situation had driven her to distraction. But she knew. She was trying to save us. Stephen watched his brother's face crumple with fresh grief. "There's more," he said softly, sliding Margaret's letter across the desk. This arrived the day before. Before it happened, it was misplaced in the filing system. Thompson must have intercepted the attachments. Andrew stared at the envelope, recognizing his wife's elegant handwriting. For several long minutes, the only sound was his ragged breathing as he read her final words. When he looked up, his eyes held a pain so deep it made Stephen step back. "She was afraid," Andrew whispered. "My beautiful, brave Margaret was afraid, and I never knew. I was so caught up in my own problems, my gambling, my desperate attempts to fix things. I didn't see what was happening to her." "The police have reopened the investigation," Stephen said. "Thompson's confession includes details about the brake tampering. They're treating it as premeditated murder." But Andrew stood abruptly, walking to the window. Below, reporters clustered at the building's entrance, hungry for more details of the scandal. "Does Lily know yet?" "No," I thought. "I thought you should be the one to tell her." Tell her what? Andrew's laugh was bitter. That her mother was murdered because I was too weak to fight my own battles? That she died protecting a family that had already been torn apart by greed and suspicion? Tell her that her mother was a hero, Stephen said firmly. That she discovered the truth when no one else could. That she died trying to save not just you, but our whole family. Andrew pressed his forehead against the cool glass. She used to tell Lily bedtime stories about knights and dragons. The truth always wins, she'd say. Good always triumphs in the end, but it didn't for her, did it? The truth died with her that night on that rainy road. Until now, Stephen reminded him. She kept fighting, Andrew. Even after I refused to listen, she kept fighting. The least we can do is make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. Andrew turned, his face set in lines of grief and determination. "I want to see everything. Every email, every document. I need to understand exactly what happened." For the next several hours, the brothers pieced together the full story. Thompson's careful manipulation of the accounts, his systematic destruction of Andrew's reputation, the way he'd used Stephen's ambition and Andrew's trust against them both. And finally, tragically, his decision that Margaret knew too much to live. "She tried to reach you that day," Andrew said, reading through the phone records. 8 calls to your office. 4 to your cell phone. Stephen's guilt was a physical pain in his chest. "I was in meetings. Important meetings, I thought. Deciding the company's future while my sister-in-law was fighting for her life. She left Lily with our neighbor that morning," Andrew remembered, his voice distant. "Said she had important errands to run. She kissed her goodbye like usual, told her to be good. That was the last." His voice broke. Stephen moved to comfort his brother, but Andrew held up a hand. "Don't! Please! I can't. I need to stay focused. Lily will have questions. She deserves answers that make sense of all this." "I'll help you tell her," Stephen offered. "Whatever you think is best. She should know what kind of woman her mother was." Andrew nodded slowly. "Margaret kept a journal. I found it after. But I could never bring myself to read it. Maybe now." "We could read it together," Stephen suggested. "If you want. There might be more we need to know." No, Andrew's response was firm. Some things should stay private. Her last thoughts, her fears, those belong to her. And to Lily, when she's old enough to understand. The brothers fell silent, each lost in thoughts of what might have been. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red that reminded them both of Margaret's favorite dress, the one she'd worn to their parents' last anniversary party, before everything fell apart. "I dream about her sometimes," Andrew admitted softly. "Not as she was at the end, tired and afraid, but how she was when we first met. So full of life and certainty. She believed in me, you know. Even after everything, she never stopped believing." "She believed in both of us," Stephen said. "Enough to die trying to bring us back together." Andrew picked up Margaret's letter again, touching the words as if he could feel her presence in them. Lily has her smile, her determination too. Sometimes it hurts to look at her. She's so much like her mother. "Then we owe it to both of them to make this right," Stephen said. "To rebuild what Thompson destroyed. To be the family Margaret died trying to save." Andrew carefully folded the letter, putting it in his wallet beside the old photograph. "It won't be easy. Too much has happened. Too many years lost." "I know," Stephen acknowledged, "but Margaret never took the easy path. Neither should we." As they left the office together, both brothers knew that the hardest conversation still lay ahead. Somewhere in the city, a young girl was about to learn that her mother was both more and less than she had believed. That her death was not an accident but an act of love and courage. That the truth, as Margaret had always promised in her bedtime stories, had finally won out. 2 months after Thompson's confession shook the Marshall family to its core, Stephen stood before the community center's board of directors. Gone was his usual power suit, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and jeans. The transformation wasn't just external. The corporate titan had been humbled by recent events, changed by the weight of truth and the possibility of redemption. "What I'm proposing," Stephen explained, "spreading architectural drawings across the worn conference table, is not just a renovation. It's a complete reimagining of what this center could be. A place of healing, learning, and second chances, everything my brother found here when he needed it most." The plans were ambitious: a modern computer lab for job training, expanded counseling facilities, a proper gymnasium, and a memorial garden dedicated to Margaret Marshall. But it was the proposed name that brought tears to Andrew's eyes: the Margaret Marshall Center for Community Renewal. "This is too much, Sarah Thompson," the center's longtime director protested. "The cost alone is not your concern," Stephen assured her. "Consider it repayment of a debt that's long overdue. This center saved my brother when my own actions helped destroy his life. It's time to pay that forward." The project quickly became a family mission. Andrew, with his intimate knowledge of the community's needs, took charge of program development. Lily, still processing the truth about her mother's death, threw herself into designing the children's areas. Even Stephen's corporate expertise found new purpose in ensuring the center's long-term sustainability. Construction began on a bright Monday morning. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone when Andrew and Stephen, together, took the first ceremonial swings with demolition hammers. As the old walls came down, so too did the barriers between them. "Mum would have loved this," Lily said, watching her father and uncle work side by side, especially the garden. She always wanted a place where things could grow. The memorial garden became the heart of the project. Designed as a peaceful retreat, it featured Margaret's favorite flowers and a small fountain whose gentle sound reminded Andrew of her laugh. The centerpiece was a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Margaret Marshall, who believed in truth, justice, and the power of second chances." As news of the project spread, something unexpected happened. Former employees of Marshall Manufacturing, many still living in the area, began showing up to help. They brought skills, stories, and a desire to be part of this redemption story. The construction site became a place of reconciliation, where old wounds began to heal through shared purpose. Remember when Dad would bring us to the factory on Saturdays? Andrew asked one afternoon as they reviewed progress. He always said a business was only as strong as its community. Stephen nodded, thinking of their father, still recovering from his stroke but following the project's progress with proud interest. We lost sight of that, didn't we? Got caught up in quarterly reports and market share. Margaret never did, Andrew replied softly. Even at the end, she was thinking about others, about healing this family. The project wasn't without its challenges. Some board members worried about accepting such a large donation from the Marshalls, fearing strings attached. Others in the community questioned whether this was just a wealthy man's attempt to buy forgiveness. Stephen addressed these concerns head-on at a community meeting. "I can't change the past," he admitted to the packed room. "I can't bring back the years my brother lost, or give my niece back her mother. But I can honor Margaret's memory by helping build something that embodies everything she believed in: hope, healing, and the power of community." The sincerity in his voice, the visible change in his demeanor, won over many skeptics. But it was Andrew's testimony that sealed the deal. "My brother made terrible mistakes," he told the gathering. "So did I. But Margaret believed in redemption. She believed that it's never too late to rebuild what's broken. This center gave me back my life when I had nothing left. Now we have a chance to help it do the same for others." As construction progressed, the center remained open, its programs continuing amid the controlled chaos. Stephen found himself drawn to the daily activities, fascinated by the real human impact of their work. He sat in on support group meetings, helped with homework in the after-school program, learned the names and stories of regular visitors. "You're different here," Lily observed one day, watching her uncle teach basic computer skills to a group of job seekers. "Less scary." "Scary," Stephen raised an eyebrow. "You know, less like a boss and more like family." The word hit home. Family. It was what Margaret had died trying to preserve, what the center had helped Andrew rebuild, what Stephen had finally learned to value above all else. 1 year to the day after Thompson's confession, the new Margaret Marshall Center for Community Renewal opened its doors. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was intentionally small, focused on the community rather than publicity. Andrew and Lily did the honors together, while Stephen stood quietly in the background, watching his brother's moment of triumph. The garden bloomed that spring as if Margaret herself was blessing their efforts. New programs flourished, lives were changed, and a family's painful legacy began its transformation into something healing and hopeful. "We did it," Margaret, Andrew whispered one evening, sitting alone by the fountain. "We finally did what you always believed we could." Behind him, Stephen and Lily approached quietly, carrying coffee and hot chocolate. As they joined Andrew on the garden bench, a soft breeze stirred the flowers, carrying the promise of new beginnings and the sweet scent of redemption. The Margaret Marshall Center quickly became more than just a building or a memorial. It evolved into a living testament to the power of redemption and community healing. As autumn painted the memorial garden in rich colors, the center's impact rippled through the neighborhood in ways neither Marshall brother had anticipated. Stephen, who had once measured success in stock prices and market share, found himself learning a new metrics: the smile of a child mastering math, the pride in a recovered addict's eyes, the quiet dignity of elderly residents finding purpose in volunteer work. He began spending more time at the center than his office, much to his board's concern. Mr. Marshall, his CFO, had protested. "The shareholders are asking questions about your involvement in this project." "Let them ask," Stephen replied, rolling up his sleeves to help unload a donation of computers. "Some investments can't be measured in quarterly reports." The transformation in Stephen was most evident in his weekly financial literacy classes. Drawing from his business expertise but stripped of corporate jargon, he taught budgeting basics to single parents, helped small business owners understand cash flow, and mentored young entrepreneurs from the neighborhood. His students were initially intimidated by his reputation, but his newfound humility and genuine desire to help soon won them over. Andrew, meanwhile, expanded the center's addiction recovery programs, incorporating lessons learned from his own journey. He developed a holistic approach that addressed not just the addiction itself, but its root causes: poverty, trauma, and isolation. His groups became known for their remarkable success rate, drawing participants from across the city. The difference, he explained to Stephen one evening, is that we're not just treating the addiction, we're building a community. When people feel connected, supported, they're stronger than any demon they face. Lily, now in high school, started a peer mentoring program for children who had lost parents. Drawing from her own experience and newfound understanding of her mother's sacrifice, she created a safe space for young people to process grief and find hope. The program, which she named Margaret's Angels, became one of the center's most touching success stories. The brothers' different approaches to community work complemented each other perfectly. Stephen brought structure, resources, and business acumen, while Andrew contributed emotional intelligence, hard-earned wisdom, and deep community connections. Together, they created programs that addressed both practical needs and deeper human struggles. One of their most successful initiatives was the Second Chance Employment Program. Stephen leveraged his corporate contacts to create job opportunities, while Andrew provided the mentoring and support participants needed to succeed. The program's first graduate was Tom Wheeler, a former factory worker who had lost everything to addiction. "The marshals gave me back my dignity," Tom told a local reporter. "Not just with a job, but with trust and respect. They showed me that my past mistakes don't have to define my future." The center's impact extended beyond its walls. Local businesses, inspired by the Marshall brothers' example, began offering apprenticeships and job training. Crime rates in the neighborhood dropped as young people found alternatives to street life. Property values stabilized as community pride grew and residents invested in their homes and gardens. Perhaps the most profound change was in the relationship between the two sides of town. The invisible barrier between the wealthy Greenwood Heights and the working-class neighborhoods began to dissolve as volunteers and participants mixed at center events. Stephen's wealthy associates found themselves working alongside former factory workers, learning from each other's experiences. "This is what Margaret always wanted," Andrew confided to Sarah, the center's director, watching a group of children from different backgrounds playing together in the new gymnasium. She believed that real change happens when people see each other as human beings, not labels or bank accounts. The center's annual community festival became a symbol of this integration. Held in the Memorial Garden, it brought together people from all walks of life to share food, music, and stories. Stephen, who once would have felt out of place at such an event, found himself flipping burgers alongside Andrew, their childhood competitiveness transformed into playful cooperation. Lily's role in bridging communities was especially powerful. Her natural ability to connect with people, regardless of background, reminded everyone of Margaret. She moved easily between her uncle's corporate world and her father's recovery community, helping each understand the other better. "Mom would be proud of us," she told her father and uncle one evening, as they cleaned up after a particularly successful program, not just because of the center, but because we're finally the family she always knew we could be. The truth of her words hit both brothers hard. They had spent so many years divided by wealth, status, and misunderstanding. Now, through their shared commitment to the center and its mission, they had found their way back to the brotherhood of their youth. Their parents noticed the change too. Robert Marshall, though still limited by his stroke, began making weekly visits to the center. He would sit in the garden watching his sons work together, his eyes often bright with tears of pride. Elizabeth Marshall volunteered in the children's program, her teacher's heart delighting in the chance to serve alongside both her sons. As the center's first anniversary approached, Stephen found himself reflecting on how much had changed. His mansion no longer felt like a fortress of solitude, but rather a temporary stop between meaningful days at the center. His corporate achievements, though still important, had taken their proper place in his hierarchy of values. "You know what I realized," he said to Andrew as they walked through the garden one evening. "All those years, I thought I was building a legacy with Marshall Tech. But what we're doing here, this is the real legacy." Andrew nodded, understanding perfectly. Margaret used to say that true wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. I didn't fully understand that until now. The brothers stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the garden in shades of gold. Around them, the center hummed with activity, a computer class in session, a support group sharing stories, children laughing in the playground. Each sound represented a life touched, a bridge built, a small miracle of human connection. Elena Rivera joined the Margaret Marshall Center as its lead counselor on a sunny September morning. A respected psychologist with decades of experience in trauma and family therapy, she brought a quiet strength and deep empathy that immediately resonated with the center's mission. What no one knew initially was how profoundly she would affect the Marshall brothers' journey toward healing. She first met Andrew through the center's addiction recovery program. Having reviewed his case history, Elena was struck by the complexity of trauma beneath his calm exterior. "You've built an impressive program here," she told him after observing one of his group sessions. "But who helps the helper heal?" Andrew had deflected at first, practiced in the art of focusing on others' pain rather than his own. But Elena's gentle persistence and professional insight gradually broke through his defenses. In their weekly sessions, she helped him confront the deeper wounds, not just the false accusations and Margaret's death, but the childhood dynamics that had shaped his relationship with Stephen. "Your brother's approval meant everything to you," Elena observed during one particularly intense session. "His betrayal didn't just cost you your reputation, it shattered your entire worldview." Stephen's introduction to Elena came through a different route. Reviewing the center's counseling protocols, he found himself drawn into lengthy discussions about program development. Elena challenged his corporate approach to problem solving, pushing him to consider the human elements he'd spent years ignoring. "Numbers and metrics have their place," she told him firmly, "but healing doesn't follow a quarterly schedule. Sometimes the most important progress can't be measured on a spreadsheet." What neither brother initially realized was that Elena had her own connection to their story. 10 years earlier, she had been Margaret's counselor during those final, desperate months. Professional ethics had prevented her from revealing this immediately, but as trust built and circumstances aligned, she knew the time had come to share this crucial link. The revelation came during a joint session she had carefully orchestrated. Margaret was more than just afraid, Elena explained, her voice gentle but firm. She was caught in an impossible situation, trying to protect everyone she loved while carrying the weight of a truth she couldn't safely reveal. The impact of this disclosure was profound. Stephen, learning of Margaret's private struggles through Elena's perspective, finally understood the full scope of his failure to listen. Andrew, discovering that his wife had sought help during her darkest times, found both pain and comfort in knowing she hadn't faced her fears entirely alone. Elena's unique position, having known Margaret, yet meeting the brothers after their transformation had begun, made her an ideal guide for their healing journey. She helped them navigate the complex emotions stirred up by the center's work, the resurfacing memories, and the challenges of rebuilding their relationship. "Grief doesn't follow a linear path," she reminded them during difficult moments. "Neither does reconciliation. The key is to keep moving forward, even when the path seems unclear." As months passed, Elena's influence extended beyond professional boundaries. She became a trusted friend and advisor, her wisdom helping shape the center's approach to family counseling. Her presence at community events, always observant but never intrusive, provided a sense of stability that both brothers came to rely on. Stephen, in particular, found himself increasingly drawn to Elena's combination of compassion and strength. Their conversations, initially focused on center business, gradually deepened into discussions of philosophy, purpose, and personal growth. He discovered in her someone who could see past his corporate facade to the struggling human beneath. "You've built walls so high," she told him once, "that you've almost forgotten there's a door." For Andrew, Elena represented a different kind of healing. She helped him understand that honoring Margaret's memory didn't mean carrying her tragedy alone. Through careful therapy, she guided him to a place where he could begin to consider the possibility of loving again without feeling guilty. The brothers' individual healing journeys intersected in unexpected ways through Elena's guidance. She helped them recognize patterns in their relationship that dated back to childhood: Stephen's need to control, Andrew's desire to please, their shared fear of vulnerability. "You're not just rebuilding a relationship," she explained during a breakthrough session. "You're creating a new one based on who you are now, not who you were before the tragedy." Lily, wise beyond her years, noticed the change in both men. Ever since Dr. Elena came, she told Sarah, the center's director, Dad smiles more. And Uncle Stephen actually listens instead of just waiting to talk. As the center's second year began, Elena's impact was evident in subtle but significant ways. The brothers learned to communicate without their old defensive patterns. They developed tools for handling disagreements constructively. Most importantly, they began to understand and accept each other's different ways of processing their shared trauma. "Margaret would have liked you," Andrew told Elena one day, watching her counsel a young mother in the garden. "She believed in the power of truth to heal." "She was right," Elena replied softly. "But she also understood that truth without compassion can be another form of violence. You're both learning to balance those elements now." Through Elena's guidance, the Marshall brothers discovered that healing their relationship required more than just acknowledging past wrongs or making amends. It meant creating a new foundation built on understanding, respect, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. The discovery of her mother's hidden diary changed everything for Lily Marshall. She found it one rainy afternoon while helping clean out the center's new storage room, a small blue notebook tucked inside a box of Margaret's old belongings that Andrew had finally found the courage to bring from home. The moment her fingers touched its worn cover, Lily knew her understanding of her mother's story was about to deepen dramatically. "Dad," she called out, her voice trembling. "I think you need to see this." Andrew recognized the diary immediately. He had seen Margaret writing in it during those final months, but had respected her privacy, even after her death. Now, holding it with his daughter, he realized the time had come for both of them to hear Margaret's voice again. Reading the diary together became their nightly ritual. Each entry revealed new layers of Margaret's strength, her fears, and her unwavering love for her family. Through her mother's words, Lily discovered a woman far more complex and courageous than the idealized memory she had carried. "I worry about Lily," one entry read. "She's so young, so innocent. How do I protect her from the truth without teaching her that lies are acceptable? Andrew tries to be strong for us both, but I see how this situation is destroying him. And Stephen, the brother he loved and trusted, remains blind behind his walls of pride and power." The diary entries covering the weeks before Margaret's death were particularly difficult to read. They detailed her discovery of Thompson's fraud, her desperate attempts to reach Stephen, and her growing fear as she realized the danger she faced. "I understand now," Lily told Elena during one of their counseling sessions. "Mom wasn't just a victim, she was a fighter. She died trying to save our family." This realization marked the beginning of Lily's deeper journey toward understanding and forgiveness. She began researching corporate fraud, trying to comprehend the circumstances that had torn her family apart. She interviewed former factory workers, seeking their perspectives on the events that had led to her uncle's fateful decision. Stephen watched his niece's investigation with a mixture of pride and pain. Her determination to understand reminded him so much of Margaret that it sometimes took his breath away. When Lily asked to see all the documents related to the case, he hesitated only briefly before granting her access. "You're very much like your mother," he told her as they went through the files together. She never accepted simple answers either. Lily's journey led her to unexpected places. She started a blog documenting stories of family reconciliation, inspired by but not limited to her own family's experience. The blog attracted attention from others dealing with similar traumas, creating a virtual community of healing that extended far beyond the center's walls. One of the most challenging aspects of Lily's journey was reconciling her image of her Uncle Stephen with both the man who had wronged her father and the one who now devoted himself to making amends. Their relationship evolved through honest conversations about the past, often taking place in Margaret's memorial garden. I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting, Lily confided to him during one such talk. But Mum's diary taught me differently. She wrote about how true forgiveness requires understanding, not to excuse the wrong, but to prevent it from happening again. The depth of Lily's insights often startled both her father and uncle. At 17, she displayed a wisdom about human nature that many adults never achieve. She became a bridge between the brothers, helping them see their shared story from new angles. Through her work with Margaret's Angels, Lily transformed her own healing journey into a source of hope for others. The peer support program she developed specifically addressed the complexity of family trauma and the challenge of forgiving without forgetting. My mom believed in second chances, she would tell the group. Not blind trust, but the opportunity to prove you've learned from your mistakes. That's what Uncle Stephen is doing now, and what Dad did years ago with his addiction. We're all works in progress. One particularly moving moment came when Lily organized a memorial service on the anniversary of Margaret's death. Instead of focusing on loss, she structured it as a celebration of her mother's legacy of truth and reconciliation. The event brought together people from all phases of Margaret's life, former colleagues, childhood friends, and family members who had drifted apart after her death. During the service, Lily surprised everyone by reading excerpts from her mother's diary. Her clear young voice carried Margaret's words to a hushed audience. If you're reading this, Lily, know that love is stronger than fear, truth is more powerful than lies, and family, real family, can survive any storm if we face it together. The impact of these words on Stephen was visible. For the first time, he wept openly for the sister-in-law he had failed to protect. Andrew, seeing his brother's genuine grief, felt the last hard kernel of resentment in his heart begin to soften. Lily's journey of understanding reached a new level when she decided to study psychology, inspired by both her mother's compassion and Elena's guidance. I want to help other families heal, she explained. Mom showed me that one person's courage can change many lives. I want to continue that legacy. Through Lily's eyes, the Marshall family story became not just a tragedy of betrayal and loss, but a testament to the possibility of redemption. Her blog posts about forgiveness and healing attracted attention from family therapists and reconciliation programs across the country. Sometimes, she wrote in one widely shared post, the hardest person to forgive is yourself. My dad had to forgive himself for not seeing Mom's fear. Uncle Stephen had to forgive himself for his blindness to the truth. And I had to forgive myself for the years I spent angry at a world that took my mother away, instead of celebrating the love that made her fight to protect us all. James Thompson Jr. arrived at the Margaret Marshall Center on a crisp October morning, his expensive suit and confident smile a stark contrast to the center's modest atmosphere. He introduced himself to the receptionist as a potential donor, but his eyes held the same calculated gleam that had made his father such a successful deceiver. The news of his appearance spread quickly through the building. Andrew, leading a support group session, felt the old familiar knot of anxiety form in his stomach. Stephen, reviewing budget proposals in his office, immediately called his security team. Both brothers knew that the son of the man who had destroyed their family wouldn't appear without a purpose. Gentleman, James said smoothly, when they finally met in the conference room, I think it's time we had a conversation about legacy. He placed a leather briefcase on the table and withdrew a stack of documents. You see, my father may have confessed to his role in the Marshall manufacturing scandal, but he was very careful about what he didn't say. There are other players, other secrets that could be quite damaging to your current charitable endeavors. Whatever game you're playing, Stephen began, but James cut him off with a sharp laugh. Game? This is business, Mr. Marshall. My father may have chosen confession over profit, but I'm more pragmatic. These documents suggest that certain members of your original board were complicit in the fraud. Their families now hold significant positions in local government. Imagine the scandal if their involvement came to light. More lies, Andrew said quietly. Like father, like son. Are they lies? James smiled, sliding photos across the table. They showed Robert Marshall, the brother's father, meeting with Thompson S.R. years before the scandal. Your father's stroke was very convenient, wasn't it? Rendered him unable to testify about his own role in the company's corruption. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Stephen reached for the photos with trembling hands, recognizing the location's private clubs where their father had often conducted business. The dates stamped on the images corresponded with the period just before Andrew's accusations. What do you want? Stephen demanded. Simple. The center sits on valuable land. Development companies are interested. Sign it over quietly and these documents never see the light of day. Refuse? He shrugged elegantly. Well, I'm sure the media would love to hear about the Marshall family's generational corruption. As if on cue, Lily walked into the conference room, stopping short at the sight of their visitor. Uncle Stephen? Dad? What's going on? James's eyes narrowed with interest. Ah, the daughter. Margaret's girl. You look just like her, you know. Same determined expression. Your mother had that same look the last time I saw her. Andrew stood so quickly his chair crashed backward. If you say another word about Margaret. Dad, Lily's voice wavered with concern. It's all right, sweetheart, Stephen said, never taking his eyes off James. Mr. Thompson was just leaving. Actually, James smiled. I think I'll stay. Miss Marshall should hear this. After all, it concerns her mother's legacy too. What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. James wove truth and lies together so skillfully that even the brothers found themselves questioning their own memories. He painted a picture of corporate intrigue where no one was innocent, not the Marshalls, not his father, not even Margaret. Your mother discovered something, didn't she? He said to Lily. But did she tell you what it was? The full scope of it? Or did she take the most damaging secrets to her grave? Lily, who had been silent throughout his monologue, suddenly smiled a smile so like Margaret's that both brothers felt their hearts skip. Actually, she did tell us everything. She reached into her bag and pulled out her mother's diary. You see, Mum was smarter than your father. She knew something might happen to her, so she left a trail not just in her diary, but in letters to her friends, in safe deposit boxes, in coded messages that only Dad could understand. James's composed facade cracked slightly. This clearly hadn't been in his script. Would you like to know what else she left? Lily continued, her voice steady. Records of every conversation she had with your father, including the one where he threatened her life. You're bluffing, James snapped, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Am I? Lily opened the diary to a marked page. October 15th, 2 days before her death. Met with James S.R. today. He brought his son to the meeting, wants the boy to learn the family business, he said. Like father, like son indeed. They threatened Lily if I didn't stay quiet. James Jr. just smiled the whole time. That same empty smile his father uses. I started recording our meetings after the first threat. The tapes are safe now, hidden, where only Andrew will think to look. The color drained from James's face. You can't prove. The tapes were in her old music box, Andrew said softly. The one she knew I'd never open until I was ready to face her loss. Elena helped us decrypt them last month. We'd been waiting to see what you'd do, knowing you'd show up eventually. Stephen stood, straightening his jacket. Your father confessed to save his soul, James. But you're here to profit from his crimes. That makes you worse than him. The police have copies of everything, Lily added, including Mum's recordings of your involvement in the threats against her. You were what, 20 then? Old enough to be charged as an adult in a conspiracy that led to murder. James grabbed his briefcase, abandoning the documents on the table. This isn't over, he snarled. Actually, Stephen said calmly, it is. Our security team has been recording this entire conversation, combined with Margaret's evidence. Well, I'm sure your lawyers can explain the implications. After James stormed out, the three marshals sat in stunned silence. Finally, Andrew turned to his daughter. How long have you known about the tapes? Since I found the diary, Lily admitted. Elena helped me understand that timing was crucial, that sometimes keeping evidence in reserve is more powerful than revealing everything at once. Mom taught me that too, in her own way. Stephen stared at the photos James had left behind. Could Dad really have been involved? Look at the dates on those photos, Lily suggested. They're all from the charity golf tournament Dad organized every year. Every board member attended. Thompson SR was just trying one last time to destroy our family. Andrew picked up his daughter's hand. You really are your mother's daughter. No, Lily smiled, reaching for her uncle's hand as well. I'm a marshal, and marshals protect their own. The aftermath of James Thompson Jr.'s visit created an unexpected rift in the Marshall family. The question of what to do with Margaret's recordings and diary sparked intense debates that threatened their newly rebuilt relationships. The center's conference room, usually a place of healing, became the battleground for competing views on justice and protection. We need to make everything public, Stephen argued during a tense family meeting. Full transparency is the only way to ensure the Thompsons can never threaten us again. His corporate instincts pushed for controlling the narrative, releasing the information on their own terms. Andrew, however, saw it differently. Making this public means dragging Margaret's name through the media again. It means Lily's peers at school finding out details about her mother's death. Haven't we all suffered enough publicity? Elena, who had been asked to mediate, watched the brothers fall into their old patterns of conflict. Perhaps we should consider what Margaret would have wanted, she suggested carefully. She kept these recordings to protect her family, not to seek revenge. Lily found herself torn between her father's desire for privacy and her uncle's push for disclosure. The diary in her hands felt heavier with each passing day. Mum wrote about the importance of truth, she said, during one heated discussion. But she also wrote about protecting those we love. The division spread beyond the immediate family. Elizabeth Marshall, finally finding her voice after years of silent suffering, supported Stephen's approach. The truth has been buried too long, she insisted. Robert would want it known that he was innocent of Thompson's accusations. But Robert Marshall himself, though limited in speech by his stroke, clearly indicated his opposition to public disclosure. His therapist translated his labored words, family peace matters more than public truth. The center's board of directors added another layer of complexity to the situation. Some members worried that publicity would damage their reputation as a safe haven for healing. Others argued that exposing corruption was part of their mission of truth and reconciliation. Sarah, the center's director, voiced her concerns during an emergency board meeting. Our clients trust us with their most vulnerable moments. How will they feel knowing their safe space is at the center of a media storm? The staff became inadvertently divided as well. Those who had worked with Andrew in the recovery program understood the value of privacy in healing. The younger employees who had been inspired by Lily's blog advocated for transparency and public accountability. As tensions rose, cracks began to show in the brothers' reconciliation. Old wounds reopened as they argued about the past and its implications for the present. Stephen's protective instincts toward the family name clashed with Andrew's hard-earned wisdom about the price of public exposure. You're still trying to control everything, Andrew accused during a particularly heated exchange. Just like you did 10 years ago. You think exposing the truth will fix everything, but some truths just create more pain. And you're still hiding, Stephen shot back. Protecting everyone but yourself. Margaret died because of secrets, Andrew? How can you advocate for keeping more? Lily watched her father and uncle's relationship strain under the pressure. Late one night, she found herself in the memorial garden, seeking guidance from her mother's spirit. Elena found her there, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to do, Lily confessed. Mum's diary shows how much she struggled with these same questions. She wanted to expose the truth but feared for our safety. Now I understand her impossible choice. Elena sat beside her on the garden bench. Your mother found a middle way, she reminded Lily gently. She preserved the truth without exposing it recklessly. Perhaps that's the wisdom we need now. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a family dinner at Andrew's small house, as the argument threatened to erupt again, Robert Marshall suddenly struck his water glass with a spoon. Though his speech was impaired, his message was clear. Show, tape, Thompson, only. Elizabeth, understanding her husband's intent, explained he means we should use the evidence only if the Thompsons threaten us again. Keep it as protection, not prosecution. The simplicity of this solution slowly sank in. They didn't have to choose between total exposure and complete silence. They could hold the truth in reserve, using it as a shield rather than a weapon. A deterrent, Stephen said thoughtfully, his business mind grasping the strategy. Like nuclear weapons, most effective when they don't have to be used. And it allows us to honor both truth and privacy, Andrew added, seeing how this approach bridged their opposing views. The evidence exists, but we control its impact. Lily, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. That's what Mum did, isn't it? She preserved the truth but was selective about how and when to reveal it. She understood that timing and context matter as much as the truth itself. The family's acceptance of this compromise brought a new level of understanding between them. They began to see how their different perspectives, Stephen's strategic thinking, Andrew's emotional wisdom, Lily's balanced insight could complement rather than conflict with each other. Elena observed this resolution with professional satisfaction and personal relief. Sometimes she noted in her journal that night, the real healing comes not from choosing between opposing views, but from finding the wisdom in both. The decision was formalized in a family council, with each member committing to protect both the evidence and each other. The recordings and diary would be secured in multiple locations, their contents known only to the immediate family and key advisors. The revelation came at the worst possible moment. During a board meeting at the center, as Lily presented her plans for expanding the youth program, a local journalist burst in with pictures of Lily and James Thompson Jr. having dinner together at an intimate restaurant outside of town. The room fell silent as the images spread across the conference table, showing the daughter of the man James's father had destroyed, laughing and holding hands with the son of her mother's murderer. Andrew, still recovering from his injuries, gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. Stephen, who had been proudly watching his niece's presentation, felt the blood drain from his face. Elena, ever observant, quickly moved to clear the room, but the damage was done. How long? Andrew's voice was barely a whisper, his eyes fixed on a photo where James was tenderly wiping a tear from Lily's cheek. 6 months, Lily answered, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. It started after he came to volunteer at the center's literacy program. He's not his father, Dad. He's trying to make amends. The news spread through the community like wildfire. Longtime supporters of the center began questioning the Marshall family's judgment. Some board members suggested Lily step down from her position. Others saw it as evidence that the family's commitment to rehabilitation extended even to their worst enemies. He saved my life, Lily explained during a tense family meeting. When I was struggling with the truth about Mom's death, contemplating some very dark thoughts, James found me in the memorial garden. He understood what it was like to discover your parent isn't who you thought they were. Stephen, torn between his protective instincts and his own journey of redemption, watched his niece closely. "Are you sure he's not using you? The Thompsons are masters of manipulation." "I've asked myself that every day," Lily admitted. "But James has been different since the fire, since Dad saved him. He's been working with victims of corporate fraud, using his inside knowledge to help them rebuild their lives. He's not seeking publicity or profit, he's seeking redemption." Elena's professional assessment provided some comfort. "I've been counseling James for months," she revealed. "His transformation appears genuine. The trauma of realizing his father's true nature, combined with Andrew's selfless act of heroism, triggered a profound change in him." But Andrew struggled the most with the revelation. Every time he looked at Lily, he saw Margaret, her strength, her compassion, her ability to see the best in people. And every time he thought of James, he remembered Thompson Sr.'s smirk as he presented the fabricated evidence that had destroyed their lives. The situation reached a crisis point when James appeared at the center, asking to address the board himself. The room was hostile, filled with people who had suffered directly or indirectly from his father's actions. "I know I have no right to be here," he began, his voice shaking. "No right to ask for your trust or acceptance. But I love Lily, not despite who she is or what my father did to her family, but because she showed me that we don't have to be defined by our parents' choices." He continued, pulling out a thick folder. "These are documents proving I've surrendered every penny of my inheritance to a victims' compensation fund. I've been working with federal prosecutors to expose remaining members of my father's network. And I've been writing a book about corporate fraud from an insider's perspective, with all proceeds going to support centers like this one." The room remained silent as James spoke about his journey from privileged son to horrified witness of his father's crimes. He described the moment he realized the true extent of the damage his family had caused, and how Lily's blog about forgiveness and healing had given him hope that redemption was possible. "I'm not asking you to forget what my father did," he concluded, looking directly at Andrew. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that love can break the cycle of hatred and revenge. Lily taught me that. She learned it from her mother, who died trying to protect not just her own family, but all the families my father would have destroyed." Sarah, the center's director, was the first to speak. "Our mission here is about second chances, about believing people can change. If we reject James solely because of his father's crimes, we betray that mission." The debate that followed split the community. Some saw the relationship as a powerful symbol of the center's message of redemption. Others feared it would reopen old wounds and drive away supporters. The local media had a field day, running sensational headlines about star-crossed lovers in corporate scandal. Through it all, Lily and James remained steadfast. They continued their work at the center, though now under intense scrutiny. James volunteered for the most challenging tasks, working tirelessly to prove his commitment to making amends. Lily faced down criticism with her mother's quiet strength, neither apologizing for her choice nor backing down from her belief in the possibility of change. Gradually, as weeks passed, the community began to see what Lily had seen in James. His genuine remorse, his dedication to helping others, and most importantly, his love for Lily, not as a way to atone for his father's sins, but as a profound connection between two people who understood the weight of painful legacies. The turning point came when James organized a support group for children of white-collar criminals, helping them navigate the complex emotions of discovering their parents' crimes. His insight and empathy, born from his own experience, created a unique space for healing that expanded the center's mission in unexpected ways. Andrew, watching his daughter's happiness bloom despite the controversy, finally began to understand Margaret's words about love being stronger than hate. In James's efforts to break free from his father's legacy, Andrew saw echoes of his own journey to overcome addiction and rebuild his life. Your mother, he told Lily one evening in the memorial garden, would have seen the poetry in this. She always believed that love could transform even the deepest wounds into sources of healing. The irony of fate struck on a stormy night 6 months after James Thompson Jr.'s threatening visit to the center. A massive fire broke out in the old industrial district, and among the buildings affected was the abandoned warehouse where James had been secretly meeting with developers about his latest schemes. Andrew, driving home from a late support group session, saw the flames and did what marshals had always done: he stopped to help. He didn't know James was trapped inside until he heard the screams. The fire department was already on scene, but the blaze had spread too quickly for them to reach the upper floors. Through the smoke and chaos, Andrew recognized the voice calling for help, the same voice that had recently threatened to destroy everything he had rebuilt. "Someone's still up there," he shouted to the firefighters, pointing toward a window where a figure was barely visible through the smoke. Without waiting for a response, Andrew spotted a fire escape that hadn't yet been engulfed in flames. 20 years of sobriety had given Andrew not just clarity but a deep understanding of redemption's price. As he climbed the rickety metal stairs, memories flashed through his mind: Margaret's smile, Lily's laughter, Stephen's recent embrace. The heat was intense, the metal burning through his shoes, but he kept climbing. He found James collapsed in a smoke-filled office, clutching a briefcase full of documents. Even in desperation, the younger Thompson couldn't let go of his schemes. Andrew didn't hesitate. He dropped the briefcase and hoisted James onto his shoulders. The journey down was a nightmare of heat and choking smoke. The fire escape, weakened by the flames, groaned under their combined weight. Halfway down, a section of the stairs gave way. Andrew managed to push James toward the waiting firefighters on a lower landing, but the momentum sent him crashing through the weakened metal. Stephen, who had rushed to the scene after receiving a frantic call from the center about the fire, watched in horror as his brother fell. Time seemed to slow as Andrew plummeted 3 stories, his body striking a parked car before rolling onto the pavement. The next hours were a blur of hospital corridors and anxious waiting. Lily arrived still in her pajamas, her face streaked with tears. Elena came straight from her home office, immediately taking charge of keeping everyone calm and focused. The waiting room filled with people from the center. Former addicts Andrew had helped, families he had counseled, staff members who had become like family. The injuries were severe: multiple broken bones, internal bleeding, smoke inhalation. The doctors spoke in careful terms about critical condition and next 24 hours. Stephen, who had faced countless corporate crises without flinching, found himself paralyzed with fear at the thought of losing his brother again, this time permanently. James Thompson Jr., treated for smoke inhalation in the same hospital, sat alone in his room, confronting the reality that the man he had threatened, the man whose family his father had nearly destroyed, had risked everything to save him. The briefcase of documents, recovered from the burning building, lay untouched beside his bed. Hour by hour, Andrew fought. His vital signs would strengthen, then weaken, then rally again. The doctors spoke of his exceptional physical condition. Years of manual labor and clean living had given him surprising resilience. But it was his spirit, they said, his fierce will to live, that kept him going through that first critical night. Lily refused to leave her father's side, reading from Margaret's diary during the quiet hours, sharing memories of their life together. Stephen paced the corridors, making calls to ensure the center continued running, trying to control what he could while his world teetered on the edge of another tragedy. Elena moved between them all, providing support where needed, ensuring everyone ate and rested when possible. She understood that this crisis could either complete the family's healing or shatter their fragile reconstruction. Dawn was breaking when Andrew finally stabilized enough for the doctors to cautiously upgrade his condition. The immediate danger had passed, though the road to recovery would be long and challenging. As the tension in the waiting room began to ease, James Thompson Jr. appeared in the doorway, his face pale and uncertain. He began, then stopped, words failing him for perhaps the first time in his life. In his hands, he held the briefcase of documents not as a threat now, but as an offering. I never meant. He shouldn't have. Stephen moved to confront him, but Lily stepped forward first. In that moment, she was so like her mother that everyone in the room caught their breath. Sometimes, she said quietly, it takes nearly losing everything to understand what really matters. James nodded, placed the briefcase on a chair, and left without another word. Inside, they would later find not only the evidence of his planned schemes, but also a handwritten confession of his father's full crimes, including details about Margaret's death that had never been revealed. Andrew would spend weeks in the hospital, months in rehabilitation, but on that morning, as his family gathered around his bed, his first conscious words were not about his pain or his heroism, but about forgiveness. "Did everyone get out?" he whispered through parched lips. "Is everyone safe?" While Andrew fought for his life in the hospital, another crisis emerged that threatened everything the Marshall family had built. The fire that had nearly claimed Andrew's life didn't stop at the warehouse district. Wind-driven embers had landed on the community center's roof, smoldering unnoticed for hours before bursting into flames in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah, the center's director, received the emergency call at 3 a.m. By the time she arrived, flames were already visible through the upper windows. The fire department, stretched thin by the warehouse district blaze, could only spare minimal resources. They fought to contain the fire, but the old building's wooden structure fed the flames rapidly. The memorial garden, Margaret's peaceful sanctuary, became a staging area for firefighters. Roses withered in the intense heat, and the fountain's gentle music was drowned out by the roar of flames and the crash of falling debris. The bronze plaque bearing Margaret's name melted into an unrecognizable mass. Elena, arriving from the hospital, watched in horror as thick smoke poured from the windows of her counseling office. Inside were years of confidential records, personal notes about clients' struggles and triumphs, the documented journey of countless lives fighting their way back from the brink. The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. People arrived in pajamas and work clothes, forming human chains to save what they could. Recovery group members rescued meeting room chairs where they had sat sharing their stories. Children from the after-school program cried as they watched their artwork turn to ash. Stephen, torn between his brother's hospital bed and the center's crisis, delegated critical decisions via phone. Insurance would cover the physical damage, but the heart of what they had built, the sense of safety, the accumulated memories, the tangible proof of redemption's possibility, seemed irreplaceable. Lily found her mother's diary rescued from the flames by a quick-thinking staff member. The edges were scorched, but Margaret's words remained legible. Sometimes destruction clears the way for new growth. The challenge is keeping faith during the clearing. As dawn broke, the full extent of the damage became clear. The main building was a charred shell. The computer lab where Stephen taught financial literacy was destroyed. The children's playroom where Lily ran her peer support groups was gone. Even the conference room where the brothers had begun their reconciliation was reduced to ashes. The media arrived with the morning light, cameras capturing the devastation. Local news reporters interviewed shell-shocked community members, each telling stories of what the center had meant to them. A recovering addict wept openly, describing how Andrew's programs had saved his life. A single mother spoke about the job training that had helped her escape poverty. The city building inspector arrived by mid-morning, his assessment grim. The structure was unsalvageable. Decades of wear and multiple renovations had left the building vulnerable. The fire had exposed critical weaknesses in the foundation itself. Insurance adjusters followed, their calculations cold and precise. The policy would cover rebuilding, but costs had skyrocketed since the center's last appraisal. The gap between insurance coverage and actual replacement cost was substantial. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting in a nearby church basement. The financial reality was stark. Rebuilding would require resources they didn't have. Some suggested relocating to a smaller facility. Others proposed merging with a larger organization. A few quietly suggested it might be time to accept that the center's mission had run its course. Sarah refused to accept defeat. Standing before the board, she read from letters hastily gathered from community members. Each told a story of transformation, of lives redirected from destruction to purpose. This center isn't just a building, she reminded them. It's proof that second chances are possible. Elena added her professional perspective. The trauma of losing this space is real, but so is the opportunity to show our clients that setbacks don't equal failure. How we respond to this crisis will teach more than any counseling session could. In Andrew's hospital room, watching the news coverage on a small TV, the brothers faced their own moment of truth. The center had been their path to reconciliation, their tribute to Margaret's memory, their way of transforming past pain into future purpose. Its loss felt like losing her all over again. But as they watched footage of community members salvaging what they could from the ruins, something unexpected emerged. People weren't just mourning the loss, they were already talking about rebuilding. Former clients offered construction skills. Local businesses pledged support. Children made signs our center will rise again. In the midst of this crisis, the true strength of what the Marshalls had built revealed itself. The center's real foundation wasn't in brick and mortar, but in the connections it had fostered, the hope it had planted, the community it had created. The combined stress of Andrew's injuries and the center's destruction pushed the Marshall family to its limits. In the hospital's ICU waiting room, the carefully rebuilt bonds between them began to fray under the weight of fear, exhaustion, and conflicting priorities. Stephen, attempting to manage both the center's crisis and his brother's medical care, retreated into his familiar pattern of controlling behavior. He questioned every medical decision, demanded second opinions, and tried to micromanage Andrew's recovery schedule. His corporate instincts took over, treating his brother's healing like a project to be optimized. "You need to slow down," Elena warned him. "Andrew needs rest, not a recovery timeline with benchmarks and milestones." But Stephen, haunted by memories of failing his brother before, couldn't step back. Lily, torn between her father's bedside and the smoldering ruins of her mother's legacy, began showing signs of emotional collapse. Her usual composure cracked, revealing the scared teenager beneath the mature facade. She lashed out at Stephen's controlling behavior, blamed herself for not being at the center when the fire started, and stopped writing in her blog for the first time since starting it. "I can't lose him too," she sobbed to Elena during a late-night counseling session. "And the center, everything Mom built, everything we built, it's all falling apart again." The strain showed most clearly in the small moments. When Stephen suggested moving Andrew to a private hospital, Lily exploded. "He needs his community, not your money." The words echoed through the ICU, carrying years of unresolved tension about wealth, class, and family loyalty. Even Elena, usually the family's emotional anchor, struggled to maintain professional distance. Her feelings for Stephen, carefully managed until now, complicated her role as counselor and mediator. When he snapped at her during a particularly tense moment, she found herself fighting back tears. Andrew, drifting in and out of consciousness, sensed the tension around him. His few lucid moments were spent trying to calm his daughter, reassure his brother, and prevent the family from splintering again. The effort exhausted him, setting back his recovery. The breaking point came when Stephen announced his plan to demolish what remained of the center immediately and begin rebuilding. "We need to show strength," he insisted. "Quick, decisive action." Without consulting anyone, Lily demanded. "Without even asking Dad? It's his life's work too." "I'm trying to save it." "You're trying to control it," Lily shot back. "Just like you tried to control everything 10 years ago. How did that work out?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Stephen recoiled as if struck. Elena moved to intervene, but Andrew's weak voice stopped them all. "Enough," he whispered from his hospital bed. "Margaret wouldn't want this." The silence that followed was deafening. Each family member faced their own reflection in the window's dark glass, seeing how far they had strayed from the path of healing they had worked so hard to build. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered, reaching for her uncle's hand. "I'm just so scared." Stephen's corporate armor cracked. "Me too," he admitted, his voice rough with unshed tears. "I can't lose you all again. I don't know how to fix this without trying to control it." Elena watched as the family's fear and pain finally found honest expression. Sometimes, she said softly, we need to break before we can rebuild stronger. In that moment of shared vulnerability, something shifted. The tension didn't disappear, but it transformed into a different kind of energy, the force of a family choosing, once again, to face crisis together rather than apart. Andrew, gathering strength from their renewed connection, made his first complete sentence since the fire will rebuild it all. Together, the right way. The path forward wasn't clear, but they had found their foundation again. In the quiet hours that followed, they began to really talk about their fears, their hopes, their need for each other. The balance between Stephen's resources and Andrew's wisdom, between Lily's passion and Elena's guidance, slowly restored itself. Margaret's presence seemed to fill the room as they remembered her strength in facing impossible choices. The family she had died protecting was choosing, once again, to honor her legacy by refusing to let crisis drive them apart. The documents James Thompson Jr. had left behind in his moment of crisis proved to be more explosive than anyone anticipated. As Stephen's legal team began analyzing the contents of the salvaged briefcase, a conspiracy far larger than the original Marshall manufacturing scandal emerged. The evidence revealed a sophisticated network of corporate fraud that extended well beyond Thompson's and his son. High-ranking executives from multiple companies, including several current board members of Marshall Tech, had been involved in a decade-long scheme of market manipulation and money laundering. This goes deeper than we imagined, Stephen told Andrew during one of his hospital visits. The younger Marshall was recovering steadily, though still confined to bed. Thompson wasn't just targeting our family. He was part of a larger operation using family-owned businesses as fronts for illegal activities. Among the most damning revelations was a series of emails detailing how the conspirators had manipulated evidence to frame Andrew. Thompson hadn't acted alone. He had coordinated with corrupt officials in the regulatory agencies and key figures in the banking sector to create a perfect storm of false accusations. More disturbing still were the documents showing that Margaret's death had been part of a larger pattern. Other whistleblowers who had threatened to expose the scheme had met with accidents over the years. The conspiracy had tentacles reaching into law enforcement, explaining why initial investigations into these deaths had been quickly closed. Stephen faced a critical decision. Making the evidence public would likely trigger a market crash and potentially destroy Marshall Tech along with the corrupt enterprises. Thousands of innocent employees would be affected. Yet keeping quiet meant allowing the remaining conspirators to continue operating with impunity. What would Margaret do? He asked Lily, who had been helping analyze the documents. Her fresh perspective had already uncovered patterns the lawyers had missed. "Mum died trying to expose the truth," Lily replied, her voice steady. But she was strategic about it. She gathered evidence carefully, planned her moves. She wouldn't want a reckless exposure that hurts innocent people. Together with Elena and Andrew, they developed a careful plan. Rather than dumping all the evidence at once, they would orchestrate a controlled revelation that would allow legitimate businesses time to distance themselves from the corrupt elements. The first phase began with anonymous tips to selected investigative journalists, ones known for their thoroughness and integrity. Key documents were released strategically, allowing reporters to build solid cases before publishing their findings. As the story began to break, Stephen took preemptive action at Marshall Tech. He called an emergency board meeting and, with security personnel present, confronted the implicated board members. The evidence was undeniable, and the arrests were handled quietly but firmly. The corporate world watched in shock as company after company was implicated in the growing scandal. What had begun as a story about the Marshall family's tragedy expanded into an expose of systemic corruption in the business world. Andrew, following the developments from his hospital bed, felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also sadness for the families who would be affected by the revelations. We need to remember that behind every corrupt executive is a family who didn't ask for this. He reminded his brother. Taking this to heart, Stephen established a fund to assist employees of the implicated companies who would lose their jobs in the fallout. It was a gesture that set Marshall Tech apart from the other corporations caught in the scandal, reinforcing the values their father had originally built the company upon. The final piece of evidence, released just as the investigation reached its peak, was Margaret's own detailed account of the conspiracy, preserved in a secure digital file that had been waiting for this moment. Her clear, methodical documentation provided the framework that tied all the other evidence together. As the full scope of the conspiracy came to light, the Marshall family found themselves at the center of a national conversation about corporate accountability and ethical business practices. But unlike 10 years ago, they faced the publicity together, united in their commitment to seeing justice done the right way. Your mother, Stephen, told Lily as they watched the news coverage, would be proud of how we handled this, not just exposing the truth, but doing it in a way that minimizes collateral damage. She always said that truth without compassion is just another form of violence, Lily replied, quoting from her mother's diary. I think we found the balance she was looking for. Margaret Marshall's complete story emerged like a photograph slowly developing in darkroom chemicals, each detail adding depth and clarity to the portrait of a woman who had sacrificed everything to protect those she loved. The final pieces came together when Elena discovered a hidden compartment in Margaret's old music box, containing a USB drive and a letter dated the day before her death. My dearest Andrew and Lily, the letter began. If you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. But know that every choice I made out of love, not just for you, but for our entire family, including Stephen. The USB drive contained video diaries Margaret had recorded secretly over her final months. Watching them in Andrew's hospital room, the family witnessed her transformation from a confused and frightened woman into a determined investigator who had methodically uncovered the conspiracy threatening to destroy not just the Marshalls, but dozens of other families. I started noticing discrepancies in the company accounts months before Andrew was accused, Margaret explained in one video. Small things at first, numbers that didn't quite add up, transactions that seemed unnecessarily complex. Thompson SR was clever, but he underestimated a former accounting major with insomnia and access to the company's financial records. The videos revealed Margaret's meticulous investigation process. Late nights spent cross-referencing documents, secret meetings with employees who had noticed similar irregularities, careful documentation of every suspicious transaction. She had created an entire parallel investigation while maintaining a brave face for her family. Most heartbreaking were the entries about Lily, my beautiful girl, Margaret whispered in one late-night recording. I hope someday you'll understand why I had to do this. Some truths are worth dying for, but only if they protect the ones we love. The footage showed Margaret's growing awareness of the danger she faced. She recorded conversations with Thompson SR. Using a hidden device, captured clandestine meetings between conspirators with a camera disguised as a brooch, and documented every threat made against her family. Stephen isn't evil, she insisted in one particularly emotional entry. He's blinded by ambition and the need to prove himself. Thompson is using that blindness, manipulating him just as he's manipulating everyone else. I have to find a way to make him see before it's too late. Her final recording, made hours before her death, revealed a woman at peace with her choices. "I've secured the evidence in multiple locations," she explained. "Set up dead man's switches that will activate if anything happens to me. The truth will come out, but on my terms, in a way that protects those who deserve protection." Andrew watched these revelations with tears streaming down his face. The Margaret he saw in these videos was both familiar and strange, his beloved wife, but also a warrior he hadn't fully known. "She was so much stronger than I realized," he whispered to Elena. The videos also captured tender moments, Margaret reading to a young Lily, family dinners filled with laughter, quiet evenings with Andrew. These glimpses of normal life made her courage even more remarkable. She hadn't been a natural hero or a hardened investigator, just a woman willing to risk everything to protect her family. "I understand her better now," Lily said, watching her mother's final message. "Why she was always telling me that truth and love have to go together. She lived that principle until the very end." Stephen found himself particularly moved by Margaret's efforts to protect him, even as she worked to expose the corruption he had unwittingly enabled. "I never deserved such a sister-in-law," he admitted. "She saw the best in me even when I couldn't see it myself." The most surprising revelation came from Margaret's detailed analysis of the conspiracy's structure. She hadn't just gathered evidence, she had mapped out the entire criminal network, identifying key players, tracking money flows, and documenting the complex web of relationships that had allowed the fraud to flourish. "It's like she built a case that could only be understood once all the pieces were in place," Elena observed. She knew that partial exposure would only make things worse. She was playing a long game, even though she knew she might not live to see it through. As Margaret's full story came to light, her legacy transformed. She was no longer just a victim of corporate corruption, but a hero who had sacrificed herself to protect not only her family but countless others who would have been hurt by the conspiracy. The Margaret Marshall Center, when rebuilt, would stand as a testament not just to her death, but to her life, her courage, her wisdom, and her understanding that true justice requires both strength and compassion. The day Andrew was released from the hospital, he found over 200 people waiting outside, former factory workers, center clients, neighbors, and even some of Marshall Tech's employees. They formed a human corridor, applauding as he wheeled through, supported by Stephen and Lily. Their spontaneous gathering marked the beginning of an extraordinary community response that would reshape the center's future. The rebuilding effort started small but grew rapidly. Local contractors offered their services at cost. Architecture students from the state university volunteered to design a more efficient, sustainable building. Former clients of the center's job training program, now successful business owners themselves, pledged materials and labor. "This isn't charity," Tom Wheeler, once a participant in Andrew's recovery program and now a successful construction company owner, insisted. "This is paying forward what the Marshalls gave us a chance to rebuild our lives. Now we're helping rebuild theirs." The community's response transcended social and economic boundaries. Wealthy donors from Stephen's corporate world matched dollar for dollar the contributions collected in local churches and schools. Children emptied piggy banks. Retired factory workers contributed their pension checks. Each donation, large or small, came with a story of how the Marshalls or the center had touched their lives. Local restaurants took turns providing meals for the construction crews. Women from the neighborhood organized a schedule for maintaining the temporary office where the center's programs continued operating. Every weekend, volunteers gathered to clear debris, plant new gardens, and help wherever needed. The media attention surrounding Margaret's story and the corporate conspiracy had initially threatened to overshadow the rebuilding efforts. But the community's response transformed the narrative from one of scandal and tragedy to one of resilience and renewal. Lily's blog became a central point for coordinating support and sharing updates. Her posts about the rebuilding process attracted attention from community organizations across the country, leading to partnerships and resource sharing that would benefit not just the center, but similar programs nationwide. Even James Thompson Jr., still wrestling with his conscience, made an anonymous donation through his mother's family foundation. When his identity was accidentally revealed, the community's response surprised everyone, not rejection, but acceptance of his attempt at amends. The new building plans incorporated elements that honored both the center's history and its future. The memorial garden would be expanded, featuring a dedicated space for meditation and healing. A wall in the main hall would display photos and stories of community members who had found new beginnings through the center's programs. Stephen, watching the community rally around his brother's vision, finally understood what his father had tried to teach them about business and society. It's not about the building, he realized aloud during a planning meeting. It's about the connections between people. That's what creates real value. Andrew's recovery paralleled the center's rebuilding. As his strength returned, he became a regular presence at the construction site, often sitting in a chair near the workers, sharing coffee and stories. His presence reminded everyone that they were building more than walls and rooms. They were creating a space for healing and transformation. Elena helped coordinate mental health professionals who volunteered their services during the transition. The temporary facilities buzzed with activity as support groups continued meeting, job training programs adapted to makeshift classrooms, and new initiatives emerged from the challenges. The most touching moments came from the center's children. They organized their own fundraising efforts, lemonade stands, art sales, talent shows. Their determination to help rebuild their special place inspired adults to dig deeper, work harder, give more. 1 year to the day after the fire, the new Margaret Marshall Center for Community Renewal held its grand opening. The building was larger, more efficient, and better equipped than its predecessor. But its true strength lay in the hundreds of hands that had built it, the thousands of hearts that had supported it, and the countless stories of hope it represented. As Andrew cut the ribbon, supported by his family and surrounded by the community that had become his extended family, he remembered Margaret's words from her final recording: "Love isn't just an emotion, it's an action, a choice." A community coming together to create something larger than themselves. Looking at the faces around him, his daughter's pride, his brother's transformation, Elena's quiet strength, and the shining eyes of hundreds of community members, Andrew knew that Margaret's legacy had grown far beyond what any of them could have imagined. 5 years after the center's rebuilding, the Margaret Marshall Memorial Garden bloomed with white roses and lilies for a wedding that no one could have predicted. Lily Marshall, now a respected psychologist following in Elena's footsteps, was marrying James Thompson Jr. Their union, once unthinkable, had become a powerful symbol of healing and reconciliation. The path to this day hadn't been easy. When Lily and James first announced their relationship 2 years earlier, both families struggled to accept it. Andrew, though committed to forgiveness, found himself wrestling with the idea of his daughter marrying into the family that had caused so much pain. Stephen worried that James's change of heart might be another manipulation. "Are you sure about this?" Andrew had asked Lily repeatedly, after everything that happened. "Mom believed in redemption," Lily always answered. "She saw good in everyone, even those who hurt her. James isn't his father, Dad, and his journey to make amends has been genuine." Indeed, James had spent the past 5 years proving himself. After his near-death experience and Andrew's heroic rescue, he had undergone a profound transformation. He surrendered all his ill-gotten gains, testified against remaining members of the conspiracy, and dedicated himself to helping other families affected by corporate fraud. The wedding preparations became a testament to how far both families had come. The old Marshall manufacturing sign, salvaged from the original center, was restored and displayed prominently in the garden. James had personally overseen its restoration, spending weekends carefully rebuilding what his father had tried to destroy. Elena, who had helped both Lily and James work through their complex family histories, stood as matron of honor. Her own marriage to Stephen 2 years earlier had been another step in the family's healing journey. Now she watched with professional satisfaction and personal joy as two people proved that love could transcend even the deepest wounds. The ceremony itself was designed to honor both the past and the future. Margaret's diary sat open on a small table near the altar, turned to a page about hope and renewal. Photos of both families' histories lined the pathway to the garden, telling a story of rivalry, tragedy, and ultimately reconciliation. Andrew walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering Margaret's words about truth and love needing to work together. As he placed Lily's hand in James's, he saw not the son of his former enemy, but a young man who had chosen to break the cycle of destruction his father had created. Stephen, standing as James's best man, another surprise that time and healing had made possible, watched his niece with a mixture of pride and awe. She had her mother's wisdom, her father's strength, and a capacity for forgiveness that humbled them all. The vows Lily and James exchanged spoke not only of their love for each other, but of their commitment to continuing the work of healing and renewal. They promised to honor both families' legacies by using their union to build bridges rather than walls. "My mother believed that love is stronger than hate," Lily said in her vows, her voice clear and strong. "That redemption is possible for anyone brave enough to choose it. James, in choosing to face the truth about your family's past and work to make amends, you proved her right." James's response moved even the most skeptical guests. "I stand here today, not just as a man in love, but as someone who has learned that real strength lies in admitting wrongs and working to right them. Your family's capacity for forgiveness showed me a better path. I promise to spend my life worthy of that forgiveness." After the ceremony, at a reception held in the center's main hall, both families came together in a way that would have seemed impossible years before. Former factory workers chatted with corporate executives. Recovery program graduates shared tables with business leaders. The artificial barriers of class and status that had contributed to the original tragedy had finally broken down. Andrew's toast to the newlyweds captured the spirit of the day. Margaret used to say that every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning. Today, we're not just celebrating a marriage, we're witnessing the truth of her words. Love doesn't erase the past, but it can transform how we carry it into the future. As evening fell and lights twinkled in the garden, Lily and James shared their first dance beneath the stars. The song they chose, one of Margaret's favorites, spoke of hope rising from ashes, of love's power to heal old wounds. Around them, their gathered guests, representing both the pain of the past and the promise of the future, stood witness to the possibility of true reconciliation. In the months following Lily's wedding, Andrew Marshall found himself entering a new chapter of his own life. Sarah Thompson, the center's longtime director, who had stood by him through the darkest times, began to play a different role in his story. Their relationship evolved gradually, built on years of shared dedication to helping others and an understanding that grew deeper with time. "Margaret would want you to be happy," Elena had told him during a counseling session when he first admitted his growing feelings for Sarah. "She loved you enough to die protecting your future. That future includes the possibility of loving again." The change in their relationship happened naturally, almost imperceptibly. Late nights planning center programs turned into quiet dinners. Professional respect deepened into personal connection. Sarah, who had watched Andrew's journey from broken man to community pillar, understood both his strength and his vulnerability in a way few others could. Their first official date was simple coffee in Margaret's memorial garden. Sarah had chosen the location deliberately, acknowledging rather than avoiding the presence of Andrew's first love in their story. "Margaret's legacy is part of who you are," she said. "I'm not here to replace her, but to write a new chapter with you." The center's community, who had watched Andrew's solitary dedication for so many years, embraced this development with joy. Recovered addicts from his support groups, remembering how he had encouraged them to rebuild their own lives, now cheered him on as he rebuilt his. Lily, initially protective of her mother's memory, found herself warming to Sarah's gentle presence in their lives. She understands, Dad, she told Andrew after observing them together. She knows this isn't about forgetting Mom, it's about honoring life's ability to surprise us with new beginnings. Stephen, who had found his own happiness with Elena, supported his brother's newfound joy wholeheartedly. You taught me about second chances, he reminded Andrew. It's time you gave yourself one too. Sarah brought her own history of loss and renewal to their relationship. A widow herself, she understood the delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. Her calm wisdom complemented Andrew's passionate dedication to helping others. Their wedding, held 2 years after Lily's, was an intimate affair in the center's garden. Unlike the grand celebration of Lily and James's union, this was a quiet gathering of those closest to them. Andrew wore the watch Margaret had given him on their first anniversary, not as a sign of lingering attachment, but as acknowledgement that love builds upon love rather than replacing it. Sarah's vows spoke to this understanding. I promise to walk beside you, accepting all that has shaped you, celebrating all that you are, and facing all that will come with hope and courage. Andrew's response moved everyone present. You helped me rebuild this center, rebuild lives, rebuild hope. Now you're helping me rebuild my heart, showing me that it's large enough to honor the past while embracing the future. Together, they expanded the center's programs, combining Sarah's administrative expertise with Andrew's personal touch. They developed new initiatives for families dealing with loss, drawing from their own experiences to help others find hope after tragedy. The photograph of Margaret in Andrew's office remained, but now it shared wall space with new memories. Sarah teaching art therapy to children, their combined family at holiday gatherings, quiet moments in the garden they both loved. Their home became a gathering place for an extended family that transcended biological ties. Holiday dinners included Lily and James, Stephen and Elena, recovered addicts who had nowhere else to go, and young people from the center's programs who needed surrogate parents. On their first anniversary, Sarah surprised Andrew with a new section in the memorial garden, a space dedicated to new beginnings, planted with Margaret's favorite flowers alongside varieties that Sarah loved. The plaque read, "Love multiplies, it doesn't divide. In honor of all who find the courage to love again." You've given me more than just love, Andrew told her that evening. You've shown me that healing isn't just about recovering from loss. It's about discovering that our capacity for joy grows larger with each challenge we face. Sarah's response embodied the wisdom that had drawn them together. We're not writing over the past, we're adding to the story. Every chapter makes the book richer, more meaningful. 10 years after the rebuilding of the Margaret Marshall Center, the Marshall family gathered for a special anniversary celebration that marked more than just the passing of time. The center had grown beyond its original mission, spawning similar institutions across the country and becoming a model for community healing and reconciliation. Lily, now a mother herself, watched her young daughter Margaret, named for the grandmother she'd never met, playing in the memorial garden with James's father's other victims' grandchildren. The site embodied everything the center stood for: the possibility that future generations could transcend the wounds of the past. Stephen, his corporate expertise now fully aligned with his humanity, had established the Marshall Foundation, which supported community renewal projects nationwide. The foundation's motto, taken from Margaret's diary, read, "Truth heals when carried with love." But under his and Elena's guidance, the foundation had helped establish 50 centers modeled after the original. Andrew and Sarah had developed a comprehensive trauma recovery program that combined addiction treatment with family healing. Their work had been recognized internationally, but they found their greatest satisfaction in the quiet moments, witnessing individuals and families rebuild their lives one day at a time. The center's success had transformed the surrounding neighborhood. Where once stood abandoned factories and empty storefronts, now thrived small businesses, many owned by program graduates. The community had become a living testament to the power of second chances and the strength of human connection. James had found his own path to redemption, using his business skills to help other families affected by corporate fraud. Working alongside Lily at the center, he helped create a program specifically designed to support children of white-collar criminals, helping them process their complex emotions and find their own identity beyond their parents' actions. Elena's psychological expertise had evolved into a new therapeutic approach that integrated personal healing with community renewal. She trained counselors across the country in what became known as the Marshall Method, a holistic approach to recovery that emphasized the connection between individual and collective healing. The original factory sign, now restored and mounted in the center's entrance hall, had become a symbol of transformation. Beneath it, a new inscription read, "Where quality is family, a legacy renewed." The words bridged the gap between the Marshalls' industrial past and their healing present. Robert Marshall, though aged and still limited by his stroke, found joy in visiting the center weekly, watching his family's legacy flourish in ways he had never imagined. Elizabeth taught art therapy classes, helping others find expression for emotions too complex for words. The annual community festival had grown into a weekend-long celebration of renewal and connection. People came from across the country to share their stories of recovery and transformation. The event always concluded with a candlelight ceremony in the Memorial Garden, honoring both those lost and those found. Margaret's presence remained strong, not as a shadow of tragedy, but as an inspiration for truth and courage. Her diary had been published, becoming a guide for other families navigating their own journeys through trauma and reconciliation. Her words continue to light the way for others we heal, not by forgetting, but by transforming our pain into purpose. The Marshall family's story had become part of the curriculum in business schools, not just as a case study in corporate fraud, but as a lesson in ethical leadership and the human cost of financial decisions. Stephen regularly spoke to students about the importance of balancing profit with purpose. Lily and James's children, along with Elena and Stephen's, represented a new generation untainted by the old wounds. They grew up understanding both the darkness and light of their family history, learning that redemption was not a destination but a continuous journey. The center's success had proven Margaret's belief that truth and love must work together for real healing to occur. Its programs combined practical support with emotional understanding, helping people rebuild not just their circumstances but their sense of worth and connection. As the anniversary celebration concluded, Andrew stood in the garden his first wife had inspired and his second wife had helped nurture. Surrounded by his expanded family, Lily and James, Stephen and Elena, Sarah, their children, and countless others whose lives had become intertwined with theirs, he realized that they had created something Margaret would have cherished, a place where broken things could be made whole again. Oh, where endings became beginnings, and where love proved stronger than any wound. The Marshall legacy, once tied to manufacturing and then tarnished by scandal, had been transformed into something far more valuable, a testament to the human capacity for healing, forgiveness, and renewal. Through their journey, they had discovered that true legacy lies not in what we build, but in how we help others rebuild themselves. Dear valued viewers, if this story of redemption, forgiveness, and family healing has touched your heart, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What moments resonated with you? How has your own journey of healing and forgiveness unfolded? Support our storytelling team by subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with friends and family who might find strength in the Marshall family's journey. Your likes and engagement help us continue creating meaningful content that explores the depths of human resilience and the power of second chances. Together, let's build a community that believes in the possibility of healing and transformation. Thank you for being part of this journey.